Hi, I'm David Bellamy, and this is episode 2 of Listen Up, our podcast about conversations from a changing workplace. Today, I'm really excited to invite a special guest, and he's really special to us because he's the very first person to ever put their hand in his pocket to pay for what was Happiness Lab and is now Harken. Jim Cleaver from St James's Place. Jim, we first met at a charity dinner, if you remember. It's a black tie deal. I think it was in London, and you had the pleasure of sitting next to me and getting Happiness Lab in your ear for the whole evening. But what I recall about that was that you very quickly kind of got to a point where you were saying, "Look, I'd like better tools to be able to get a sense of what's going on in my team all the time." And that was, if you think back the 6 or 7 years, that was remarkably progressive, realizing the journey. I thought everybody would just say that, but they didn't. And so I'm really thrilled to have you with us today. I think you're a terrific leader, and today I'm going to get under the skin a little bit of that. So welcome.
I'm looking forward to that. Thank you. Great to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Yeah, good. Now look, let's start with I guess the easiest thing. Tell us your story. How did you end up here? I don't really mean in this room, but what's Jim's story?
Yeah, and my background, so I'm the Technology and Information Director for St James's Place. But I find myself constantly saying to people, my background is not technical. I'm not a techie by background, and a lot of people in this space clearly are. A very long time ago, I was, so 20 odd years or more, I was an officer in the military, joined the services sort of out of uni, did a short commission in the Royal Marines, and sort of transitioning away from what at that point was my dream job. It was my dream job to do for a short period of time. I did that and then decided it was time to move on. Kind of stumbled into consulting, if you like, through a few contacts, a few guys that had moved on before me, a few conversations around what I did and how I did it, with similar sort of people, my peers at the time. Kind of gave me a realisation that what I did ultimately was project management, was getting people and equipment and capabilities and skills in the right place at the right time to do a job. I wasn't necessarily a specialist in that arena, in what I was doing, but I knew who the specialists were and was able to sort of bring that team together. So it was really leadership and project management that were my skills. That helped me into a career in project management, in business consulting, and I spent 15 years sort of working my way through project management into program management and into business change. I had a bit of a penchant, I suppose, for people, for leading people. I'd found that previously. I liked leading large teams in the military. Those were the opportunities I was taking, rather than potentially the more sort of technical, staff-driven roles. It was the big teams that I liked working with. So business change, people change, cultural change, that kind of thing was really attractive to me, and that was something that I got into probably in the sort of latter half of that 15 years as a consultant. Worked mainly in the public sector. Took a few kind of steps out into different organisations to try and broaden myself a little bit. Did a little bit of private sector consulting, but got to a stage in that career where I was kind of bored of solving other people's problems. I didn't really own anything. There wasn't any team that was mine. I was going into situations, picking things up, working out what was wrong with them, helping people fix them, and then sort of handing them back and walking away and going on to the next thing. So I got to a stage where I really wanted to own something. I wanted to live in a team, with a team, and be part of that team on a permanent basis. And so when the opportunity came up to sort of move industries, I was in very much public sector and sort of defence space. Opportunity came up to join St James's Place to move industries and to take on a team that needed. It was a consulting role, I suppose, in the first instance, and some of that is the reason that Happiness Lab, as it was then, was attractive to me in the first instance because of the challenge I had on my hands, and we'll come to more of that later. But it was an opportunity to move industries, do something new, do something exciting, a real opportunity behind it, but also to own something, to stay somewhere, to join an organisation that I saw a future and a career in, and a change from that, picking things up and putting them down and moving on that I was getting from consulting.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine that. I mean, I was a career consultant. I know that we leave stuff behind, don't we? And it's easy I think sometimes to do that, and other times we miss, I guess, seeing things through. So good. How long ago was that?
So 7 years ago, I joined St James's Place. I joined to do a data strategy in the first instance.
Yeah.
So I picked up data strategy in the absence of any data strategy. So as a business consultant, I kind of did a bit of a deal with my boss and still my boss in Ian McKenzie, and sort of said we can do a version 1 data strategy. But at some point, we need to expand this and put some real capability, some real professionals in there to sort of lead and run that. But a version 1 data strategy was well within my capabilities and something I took on 7 years ago for St James's Place, and since then have sort of expanded into the rest of technology and beyond into automation, business improvement, cyber, and much wider in the data space as well. So the roles expanded quite considerably in that time.
Yeah. Now you talked a little bit about the beginning of your career in terms of the military bit, but a little bit of a thought exercise, if you like, the thought experiment. So a thing I like to call then and now, if you like, that when you started work, how would you describe that period? So what was work like back when you started? It's a long time ago, right?
Yeah, it was a long time ago. It's I'm thinking about back now to 1997. And I went into a job in 1997. So I left uni age 22. In fact, I started work on a building site. I filled a gap year before I joined the Royal Marines. I filled a gap year, just staying fit and going into a fantastically fun environment, but a very different environment to the one I've been in ever since. But it was a means to an end to sort of get in and start my career as a military officer. That was a dream that I'd had, something that I'd wanted to do for quite a while before, and I sort of built up to over a number of years, and something that I'd focused myself on. So I think I had an expectation of what that was going to be, and then a reality that was slightly different. You kind of have in your mind, or I had in my mind, that that you were going to be put through the mill, and we were, but you had in your mind that everybody was superhuman, both mentally and physically, and that they were going to stand out, head and shoulders, literally above you and everybody else, and it was going to be a really challenging environment to operate in. And levels of professionalism were really high, but when you get into that environment, actually, you're trained very well. Your capabilities have been developed, so you're all on a level. Yes, there are very high standards, but there's not that everybody's human, and it works very much in the same way that companies do today. There's different relationships. Some people are good at some things, less good at others. So I think the reality that struck was this is a team, a very close-knit team, but a team nonetheless same as any other team with different things going on, different challenges, and not necessarily that sort of up on a pedestal, superhuman, nothing bothers us kind of thing. That I might have thought before I got there. And I think the preparation for that, for me, that's what I always look back on. I still look back on today. The preparation, I don't think in industry we really prepare people for the roles that they go into. Yeah. If you look at the way the military do it, there is a long period, a very intense period of preparing somebody to fulfill a particular role. Now you could say that in some ways it's too structured. There's too much to it. There's too much of a framework there. But I think it is really valuable that you invest the time in people, and then you expect a lot from them. You expect a lot in terms of performance and professional standards, but you've invested that time, and enabled them to have that. And we've recently visited the military, a military team last year, I think it was, with St James's Place, and quite astounding when you're talking to guys there, asking them. I remember asking a couple of guys in front of my boss to sort of make a point. But guys, how long did you spend training last year? How much of your year was spent on training courses and actually building your skills? Knowing that in our teams, people will be lucky if they get a week or two. Yeah. And the response was, not long. Okay, well, how long's not long? A couple of months. But, it's incredible the amount of investment that goes into the people to ensure that they are ready to do the job that you're asking them to do, which you kind of have to do if you're asking somebody to put their life on the line. So I think it's still something I look back on and sort of draw analogies with and ask myself, are we doing things the right way?
Yeah, well, I think that's something I was going to talk to you about today. There's a few stories that you and I have shared over the years where business absolutely loves a sporting analogy, and I've always struggled with the comparison between people who train 95% of the week and then go and play football for a couple of hours. And I'm not saying that's easy because they're like the height of their profession, but to compare a team set up in that context to one that works for 99.9% of the time and trains for the 0.1 for 365 days a year or 220 days a year. That's what it's missing. But the military one is sort of interesting, isn't it? Because it's there are a few things that we've touched upon. One is, I think that I'd probably lived under a misapprehension that the command and control structure meant that you were told exactly what to do all the time. But you've told me some different things in that over the years, in terms of how teams actually function.
And I certainly, I say to people now, I have worked in very heavily command and control focused organisations, and the Royal Marines is not really one of them.
Yeah.
That's a very autonomous organisation. Yes, the support's there if you need it, but you're in an environment where you could be sent out. So I had experience where you'd be sent out for 6 or 8 weeks on a ship. You're completely autonomous, and what you do is down to you, and how you develop your team and where you go and what you do is largely down to you as the commander on the ground. Clearly, there is a command and control structure there which kicks in at times, but the decisions, how to achieve an objective is left to you. And I don't think we do enough of that across industry.
Yeah.
And I think some of that is down to the fact that we don't prepare people to be able to do that. People aren't used to doing that. So when we ask somebody to go be autonomous, they kind of, well, hang on, I'm not. This isn't what I do, what I've done for the last 10, 15, 20 years, and therefore I'm going to struggle to do it today, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I'm really interested in, because there's lots of talk out there about flat structures and about self-managed teams, but one of the things I observe, and I'd like your view on, is actually permission-based cultures are probably dominant, and so we tend to. Well, is this just a fear thing? But I look at people that I work with across companies, and the variation that you get in terms of willingness to do something that is really low risk, rather than go execute something really difficult. Just waiting for who do I have to ask? What? That's a big difference, right?
And I think removing the fear is more difficult than we think. We seem to have a perception as leaders, and I include me in this, that we can just tell people, it's fine, make the decision. If it goes wrong, I'll back you. But it takes time to build that trust, and people will learn that through experience. Okay, well, I tried this and that didn't go very well. I got the telling off. I got I got the response that I feared, and therefore I won't do it the next time. I'll clam up and I'll move away. So it's not just me as a leader. I need to make sure the other leaders around me are aware that I've asked my team to do a particular thing, and if it goes wrong, please come back to me with it. Don't snap at the team. Don't react to the team. Be aware that that's the culture and that's the behaviour that we're trying to encourage.
Yeah.
And the moment we go against that, we break down that trust, and it becomes harder to do it the next time. And I do think that it's a very complex onion to unpeel, to make sure that we've pulled all that away. And then even when people are comfortable, they do trust that, okay, I can do that. You're still not used to doing that. You still haven't been in an environment where you've been doing that, and therefore relying on your teams, looking, to use the military analogy again, people would know that's not my skill set, but it's the skill set of the person on the other side of the field over there, and therefore I will, I'll go and consult them. I'll go and assess what the options are, using those skills, bringing those skills together. In our corporate environments, people are often used to, in the extreme, being told what to do, and not operating in that manner.
Yeah, it's part of what you're talking about there is. It's psychological safety, but it's more than that, isn't it? The psychological safety thing, I think, everybody's talking about at the moment. I have a personal view that it's not that I disagree with the aim. I just don't think it's a very realistic aim. The point is you should have psychological safety in the team that you work with, right? Because that's how you're going to take risks. But the problem is when you all have different styles and there's different leaders with different functions and different priorities, as soon as you start to mix teams, then inevitably personal risk emerges, right? And that we're never going to get away, because that's a real human thing. And unless you can stabilize a team so that you don't hire anybody new, which brings a whole set of different issues, right? That trust is challenging.
And I think that psychological safety is a good thing. It's a necessary thing. It is what I'm trying to generate, and it's why I've used tools and channels like Happiness Lab and now Harken. But it's also, the answer is sometimes no. We can have psychological safety, we can have the conversation, but that doesn't mean it's always going to go your way. The fact that you've opened up that particular thing's not working, for me and as a leader, sometimes I need to take the views and opinions, consider the options and say, okay, thanks very much, but here's my decision. I can be consultative, and I think for me personally, I'm very consultative to a point, but there comes a point where we have to draw the line and say, okay, decision required here, otherwise we're never going to get anything done. Yeah. Not everybody's going to like the decision. And that, for me, is not necessarily it's not necessarily a removal of the psychological safety. It's not to say that you shouldn't have raised the point in the first place. And I think that relationship takes time to build. That sometimes the answer is no, and we're not all right, and we're not all going to go in the direction that you may have suggested or I may have suggested, because it might be me that's getting pushed in the direction I don't want to go in.
Yeah. I think that's a really important thing, isn't it? What I've always admired about you, as I said at the beginning, is that your willingness to be all ears, so to speak. To open up and say, okay, let's. When many people have found that challenging over the years, it's certainly more common now for people to say, actually, I really need to know more. I want better sense making tools. I want to be able to get a more realistic sense of what's going on, rather than just what people tell me to my face. That as you say, doesn't necessarily always mean we're going to hear what we like, or indeed that we have to. I mean, we talked about this many times. We don't always have to react or respond to everything that we hear. It's about building a picture, isn't it? And then ultimately how the team moves forward is how the team moves forward.
And I think, but some of that reaction and response is expectation setting. Some of the reason I want to listen and know what's out there is to set people's expectations as to what kind of organisation we are, what purpose we have, what kind of work we're doing. Because if this may not be the right organisation for you, is a conversation I find myself in from time to time. If you're open and honest with me, there are problems I can solve. There are things we can do. There are things that within our gift that we'll just get on and do. And in some cases, we'll seek forgiveness, not ask permission. But in other cases, that's the kind of organisation we are. To use a St James's Place example, we're a face-to-face organisation. To at least some degree, we want people in the office. We want people interacting with each other, with our partners, and with other employees. And if that's not the kind of organisation that you see yourself being part of, if you want to be in an organisation that works completely differently to that, there's nothing I can do or want to do about that, because that's how we want to operate. So I feel a responsibility to set people's expectations, and that's not to say I'm going to march you out the door on Friday afternoon, but it's just to set expectations and say, look, if that's your expectation, if that's what really gets to you about the way that we work or the things that we do, actually perhaps you ought to think about long term whether this is the right environment for you, because if I'm being honest, that's not the way we work, kind of thing. So I think there's an expectation setting element as well as a problem solving element. And in those early days, I think a number of us got trapped in the problem-solving hole and tried to pick everything up and solve the problem, whereas now I would hope we're a bit more holistic in terms of the view we take and expectation setting and working out what we can solve, what needs solving, and actually what's never going to change. Yeah,
and I think, some of what you've described there, and I'm going to come back to the work from home thing, because I think that's an interesting thing for us to talk about. But some of what you described there, I think, is part of what I describe as those little mental models that we're often trapped in when it comes to employee voice, right? So if we listen to employees, everybody thinks, when I start talking to people about that, what they'll think immediately they go to is surveys, right? What we all think about with surveys is, I'm going to ask you some questions that I've chosen, right? And then you're going to give me a response, and then I'm going to go away, think about it, and I'm going to come back and fix it, right? And we know that cycle doesn't work for people, because we're always, nobody gets what they wanted out of that process. It's always a bit slow. We never really remember what we said in the. There's a process there, but and I remember this from when we began. That the idea that what we were seeing was, or what we inadvertently created was conditions in which you and the managers felt like we just put that on steroids, right? So I feel obliged to fix the things. You've told me some stuff, I need to address it. And I think what's brilliant about the way both we and so the world has evolved around this stuff is just we're starting to reframe what real-time voice actually means. So it's a sense making. It gives employees a chance to speak about what they want to talk about. And then, because we've become much more dialogue based, actually people are interacting rather than waiting for somebody else to solve it, right?
And the interaction is the really powerful thing that's happened. It wasn't there in the beginning. We didn't see it. There was an expectation that, you're the leadership. Here, I've given you a problem and it's your job to solve it. We've moved on from that, and we're now very much, I can go in and look at the wall on Harken and see dialogue and interaction and conversation happening that is solving the problem. It doesn't need me to get involved, because somebody's started a conversation and others have got involved, and it's working its way through. So, and that's really what I'm aiming for, is actually people taking responsibility, because that's moving towards the culture that I want in terms of people being more autonomous, taking responsibility, making their own decisions. If they're doing that on a small scale at a personal level and helping each other with that, then hopefully they'll do that in their teams and and working towards business objectives as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Now let's come back. There's a couple of things that we've moved on and I want to come back to, but let's just the most recent thing, the work from home conversation. So this is obviously a really hot topic, right? So it's interesting because you've seen different approaches being taken. So people got used to a set of flexibility, to a degree of autonomy around their time and how they use it. There's definitely an inclusion angle to more flexibility and work from home. What's your sense of how we navigate through what's the right balance?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure there's any right, but there's no correct answer.
Right.
And I think you've only got to look at the newspapers or the media to see that you've got people flipping and flopping backwards and forwards between policies and decisions, and everybody's struggling with it. So there's certainly no perfect answer, but for me there's a corporate approach, there's a corporate view on how we want to operate, and there's a personal approach, and those personal approaches are all very different, and that's something I've become very conscious of over the course of the past 2 years or so, is that just because I have a particular preference to work in a particular way doesn't mean everyone else has or should have. Their mindset, their needs in terms of their family, their home needs, the wider needs may be completely different to mine, and their job role may be completely different to mine. So there's a number of different dynamics in there, and we can't apply a single model, a single framework to everybody. And I think the opportunity is flexibility. The opportunity is providing people with enough flexibility, but some guardrails to say, here's an expectation, but within those boundaries, you decide how much time you do at home, how much time you do in the office.
Yeah.
Corporately, we have an expectation that we see people in the office. And personally, one of the things for me that I think teams are struggling with, have always struggled with, so something I got from the military and you see in sports teams, is a really strong common purpose and a really strong social element. Those people work together, but they socialise together, they live together, they spend large parts of their lives together. So we're always going to be, and pre-COVID we were, challenged by teams. Our teams can't be as effective as those teams because they're not as social together, they're not as closely knit as those teams. But COVID's made that even worse. Yeah. So for me, I think there is something, the challenge I'm sort of fighting with at the moment is actually how do we get the teams to be more sociable. It's not about getting in the office and necessarily working at the same desk together, a number of days a week, but I do want people to be interacting more socially, physically in the same room, in the same space as one another. I think that's the big challenge that COVID's created. It's driven us apart from a social perspective.
Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely right. What was I don't know if you saw this last week, as they do every year, Gallup produced their State of the Global Workforce reports, and it said, the headline was engagement levels hit record peak. Just out of interest, I don't know if I've already tested you on this, but do you know what that number is? So percentage, what? So it's a record number. What do you think that number is?
As a percentage, I would think probably a guess, and it is a guess, 80%.
Yeah, okay. So engagement levels at record, 23%.
which is incredible.
Global, isn't it? Nuts. So I find that amazing. And so thank you for playing that game, because I did that online last week, by the way, because people, everybody went, oh, probably 25. And I think, well, hang on, this doesn't work as a game if you all get it correctly. But 23%, which I think is woeful. It doesn't mean that the rest are all disengaged, but they're certainly not engaged, right? In the UK, by the way, that number's 10. What I think it's telling us, what Gallup would say is happening, and I think we would absolutely back this with what we see, is connection is missing. So what employees are saying is we want more, we want better engagement, we want better culture. What I think, and I said the flexibility thing has obviously improved many people's lives in many ways, but I think the connection thing is a really big problem. We're working from home, we don't see each other. I had my team in here last week. We get together once a quarter. We're fully remote, right? And we did something really interesting, which was we spent the day on the connections. So we did work stuff, but we did an hour and a half long walking meeting, which is our quarterly review. And that was terrific because it just changed the dynamic of dialogue. Our conversation was totally different than it would have been if we were sitting at a desk. You sort of left the day feeling like we'd invested loads of time in the people side, and I think it just reminded me of how much you need that. And I think that's the point I'm getting to, is I think we've lost that a bit, haven't we?
I think we've lost that a bit. We've also lost the awareness of the fact that the connections are important. That and again, a personal learning from me during COVID. You get yourself to a position where you're like, I'm not feeling great about this. It's taking me a lot longer to do these tasks than it would normally. What's up with me? Well, just get on with it, kind of thing. And then you realise actually it's the connection that I'm missing, or it's a break away from the screen. But it's the personal, the human connections.
Yep.
When they started to come back, you kind of feel yourself lighting. Again, it's a personal thing. I know. Personally, I'm very connected to people. I like spending time with people, being in the same room, having conversations. But it took the sort of release of lockdown to realise that, to make the connection for me to go, this is what it is.
Yeah.
I'm not performing as well because I'm not spending time with people, and that for me is a bit of a break from sitting down and writing a report for a couple of hours, and it helps me free my mind up and put my brain in the right place to go and do those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So when I wasn't getting that, it slows me down on everything else. It has an impact across the board. And I don't think widely we recognise that those connections are so important.
Yeah. That being in the same space as other people, I think, is undervalued as well, frankly. I think as I say, I watched my team last week. There's only 6 of us, and it's good. It's a really healthy, positive way to spend time together. But I'm also minded to some of the conflicts in projects. I remember years ago, and this is not a COVID-related thing at all, but I remember years ago working on a project where it was all to do with like a product release cycle, and we'd built this sort of war room where on one wall was all the stuff that Team A said about Team B, who were sort of later in the process, and then on the other wall was everything that Team B said about Team A, and then we brought them into a room and let them read the comments that they'd said about each other, and once they'd connected the dots to human beings and actual people, and I know this sounds a bit facile, but it was remarkable to watch what happened when people then made a human connection rather than the person behind the process, right? And then all the issues go away, because suddenly it's not that bloke from Risk who's stopping my marketing campaign from launching. It's Ian in Risk, and I like Ian. Ian's a good guy, and we can have a conversation, and I think that stuff is lost, isn't it?
It's definitely been lost, and I think it's difficult to describe. It's difficult to explain that that's what we're going to go and do. We're going to go and spend an hour and a half going for a walk. Because it's difficult to describe the power that you'll get from that afterwards, and the power you'll get from that doing that on a quarterly basis or a monthly basis, where it happens to be, the relationships you build, and the ability to pick the phone up to that person afterwards. So you're not in the same room, but it's now much easier to pick the phone up and have a conversation.
Yeah.
Whereas in the corporate world, but lockdown's made it worse, or COVID's made it worse. It's so easy to just tap things into an email or a Teams chat or whatever other channel. Yeah. You can kind of punch the message into and press the enter key and, it's gone, I won't worry about it. It's just not as effective as those conversations.
It's a transactional mindset, isn't it? And that's the thing. We can get through lots of stuff. So I think, again, I know you are saying this, and I am as well, just for the avoidance of doubt. I don't think either of us are saying, look, this is about our needs or anything else. It is about the team function, and it's about thinking about, this engagement problem is one, as you would have read in our ebook recently. Engagement is a relationship building process. Wendy, our new head of engagement, has a terrific way of describing this. Right, so she talks about the fact, imagine asking your people in your team to come and help you move house at the weekend, right? And the reaction that you might get. Now, in lots of work contexts, that would be no, thank you. Right? You can't be the guy that phones up and asks a big favour when you've not invested in a relationship. And I think that's a really because what we do at work, of course, is we're constantly asking people to move. We're constantly asking people to help us do stuff that's different, to get off that place that you are. And this is the trust thing, isn't it? This is where we're saying that come with me. I think to a football analogy, Pep Guardiola has a reputation of being high on philosophy, and he's obviously a terrific football manager. I won't go into any of that because I don't really know, but I do remember something that Xavi, the Barcelona player, said. Well, if he asked me to step off the top tier of the Camp Nou, I would, because I'd assume there was something really terrific at the bottom, right? And I think that's a really interesting way of thinking about.
And it is a really interesting way, and it displays that that sense of belonging and connection that you have in a military team. And I would assume, I've not had a massive amount of exposure to professional sports teams, but if you said to many military teams, will you come and give me a hand to move at the weekend? The answer will be yes. Yeah. And that's what they do. That's how they operate together. It's a very close-knit group, albeit there's a job to do and a purpose. And at times it's like, okay, this is absolutely our intent today and where we're going and what we're doing. But because of that closeness, it makes the team far more effective. But I don't think you can't really recreate that in a corporate environment. You see it with, I was listening to a podcast, one of the rugby podcasts a week or two ago, and there was a couple of Premiership rugby players who were in the process of retiring or had recently retired, talking about really openly about how they really struggled with their sort of mental health, having stepped off of that kind of, stepped out of that environment. And now they've moved into a space where they're like, okay, work's become more 9 to 5. It's not what it used to be. Yeah, I get more time with my wife and my family, but I don't do what I used to do with the team, that I've done for the last 15 years. So they're very different environments. Yeah. But it does demonstrate the power of connection, and when taken to extremes, you do get to positions where people will literally do anything for each other.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know that I've ever worked with people that I'd be rushing around to help them move house. I think I've even moved house to my own while I've been at work, and I've gone home and it's been moved, right? So I wasn't good at doing my own. But I think there's a powerful analogy in there, isn't there? In the relationship building bit and the investment that it takes. I mean, that's the message, isn't it? The investment that it takes to get people to come and do something, a big ask like that, should tell us everything about what we might want to move towards at work.
A number of people have asked me over the years, how do we replicate that military team ethos and the relationships in those teams? And you can't, but you can learn a lesson from it. Yeah. You can see the example set by this is what connection does. This is what the strength of relationship does. Whilst we can't replicate it, we can move towards it, and we can go for a walk around the water park, or we can go for a game of cricket in the evening, and gel the team and bring the team closer together, and move some way towards that.
Yeah, brilliant. Now I'm going to take us way, way back, because I started with tell us what work was like when you started, and you told us sort of really interesting, I guess, version of life at the beginning of your career, where certainly in the military, you learned a lot fairly quickly. Different now, I guess, particularly in the setting. But how do you think, or how similar or different do you think work would be for somebody starting? You've got children same age as mine, haven't you? So just at the sort of thinking about entering work, probably. What do you think work would be like for them compared to what it was like for you when they started?
I've not thought about that particularly deeply. I do wonder, think about, for young people, straight from university, joining our teams, coming into our organisation, how do we make sure that we've got a common sense of purpose for those people to really latch onto, to really be able to sort of set their sights on and understand what the rest of the team are doing and where we're heading? Because there's so much going on in the world, but just in the corporate environment. If you just look at my team and the number of different things we're doing at any one time, to have that common purpose that's not so far up in the stratosphere that it's difficult for people to connect to, is a real challenge, I think, because of the pace of change, the pace of what we deal with on a daily basis, makes that challenging for us as leaders to describe. And when I put myself in the shoes of my kids or young graduates joining our organisation, I do feel it's a challenge to try and to be able to put something there that's close enough to connect to, but relevant to everybody in a large team. I do think there's there's the power of things like induction program. How do we bring people into the team? What is it that we do to tell people that we're special and what we do is special and how we do it and how we fit together and who those important people are? Not important in terms of grade, but important in terms of how they influence your role and the conversations you ought to be having and the people you should understand and the parts of the organisation you should understand. I don't think we do a particularly good job of that in the corporate world broadly. And I think that's a challenge for anyone joining, but especially youngsters coming in.
Are you seeing a difference, by the way, in post-COVID times? I'm going to talk about COVID in a minute, but are you seeing a difference in because we just touched upon some of the differences at work, right? But the way young people are attaching to the workplace, how engaged they're becoming, or indeed how.
So some of this, I'm conscious as I become more senior, I become my perceptions of my distance is greater from some of the teams. The team's bigger and it's difficult to get a handle on to temperature check and to get a sentiment from a whole team. Hence the use of tools like Harken or the use of Harken. But my perception post-COVID is that work has become more 9 to 5. People are trying to separate it out and say, okay, well, I've got work and I've got life. I've got work and I've got family. I've got work and I've got other things that I do. COVID almost forced us to, because we all sat at our kitchen tables and had to have a point where we said, right, we need to shut the laptop now and walk away. Otherwise, we're just going to work ourselves into the ground. So there had to be that separation in COVID. I think that separation is enduring in some places, and that's what's making it difficult for us to create that engagement, to encourage people to come back in and say, look, let's socialise together as well as just working together. That for me feels like the big challenge, getting the right balance and the right mix post-COVID.
I get that. I think that's. I've got to say, I thought the COVID thing, just on that, you saw a massive uptick in empathy, corporate empathy, if you like, because like you said, we saw into each other's bedrooms in some instances, and I think we then suddenly got a sense of what everybody else's life was like. And it feels like there's a sort of shrinking back of muscle, maybe, sort of that muscle memory kicking back in, and we're sort of forgetting some of that. But I guess what I've just heard you say is maybe it's actually both sides of the equation. So employees have created a clearer delineation between, or trying to at least, because things got blurred.
Clearly, there's some positives and some negatives, and it depends on your point of view, which are positives and which are negatives in terms of the things we take away from COVID. But I think one of the positives is the ability to be more flexible, to be more hybrid. But it does feel that personally for me, one of the negatives we've taken away is that separation that people are making between work and home. And almost separating them out as completely separate communities, completely different communities. And it's starting to come back, but where are we now 2 years later down the line? Starting to encourage people to get together. The office feels more normal. We're seeing more socials happening, that kind of thing coming back in. But it's taken some really hard work to get people to accept that. And I still don't think you see as much, in the old days, in the pre-COVID days, people just disappearing out for a coffee or a beer after work, or and spending that time together. Things like running and cycling groups. We're just sort of trying to get back on their feet now to encourage people to do something together after work, which felt really natural previously, and now it's quite difficult because people, in many cases, I think, are sort of walking, right, okay, I've finished work now. I've closed my laptop on the dining room table or in the corner of the bedroom. Now I'm going to walk away and do what I need to do this evening. And that blurring, I think, is positive. It's not. We need to make sure that we've got a good balance and that we're not blurring it too much, and that we're not burning the candle at both ends. But I think the blurring is positive, to be able to walk away from work in the middle of the day and say, right, I'm going to go to kids' sports day or go and do whatever it is I happen to need to do today. But to spend some time socialising and interacting with your team so that you all do a better job and you enjoy you enjoy coming into the workplace.
Yeah.
I always say to people, I don't expect you to enjoy 100% of what you do, but if you don't enjoy a large proportion of it, why are we doing it? Why would I continue to go back to a place that I just don't enjoy going back to? So trying to make it an enjoyable environment, I think, break down those barriers and blur the boundaries would be a positive for all of us.
Yeah. I think that the point about enjoying work, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, again, it's a journey we've been on. I may as well talk about that now, because you were client one, right? Payee one, and which we're brilliant. But so as you alluded to earlier on, a very, very different product, Harken, when we started. Obviously it was called something else, but I think about our journey as being massive, right? We've learned loads of stuff. The product has evolved immensely. But what's that been like for you? Because it's been 6 years.
Yeah, I think it started. I sort of alluded to earlier that I came from a consulting background. I walked out of a consulting role and into, what's now for me a permanent career role on the other side, if you like. But I was still a consultant and still viewing my role, my challenge as a consulting case, if you like, at that point in time. I had a team that appeared, they weren't particularly happy in what they were doing. They didn't think that we were doing the right things in the right way. There were all sorts of opinions and ideas, and it was quite a lot to consume, and I needed to get my head around, okay, actually, what are the key challenges here? What are the things that we need to deal with? And some of those are technical, boxes and wires, and okay, we know we need to fix that thing over there, but what are the people challenges? And I've always been conscious that as a leader, you're in danger of hearing a small number of voices and only focusing on those voices and becoming quite distracted by those voices. There could be other people stood behind who actually have a point to make, but either can't make it, don't want to make it. The mechanisms that I had, so Happiness Lab then for me and Harken now is a channel, and I always say to the team, it's not the be all and end all. This is not my only means.
Just to me, by the way,
gathering this insight.
Yeah.
But there are other channels, other means, and one of those is just walking around the office. So just walk around the office, have a conversation with people. So I could walk around the office, I could have a conversation with people, I could speak to my leadership team. We had the survey, as you mentioned, but it was a 2-year survey, and it wasn't very granular. Okay, what's this really telling me? Well, I'm not quite sure. And if I do draw a conclusion, it's 2 years until I ask the question again.
Yeah.
So I needed something that was going to give me more of a temperature check, more of an ongoing, actually, how are people really feeling? And a safe psychological space, because it did feel a little bit like I'd walked into a team that were like, look, nobody listened to us, nobody cares, and therefore they clammed up. and felt that they were in a relatively negative environment, that we're just going to carry on doing what we've been told to do, and and there's no point moaning about it. So it was an opportunity to ask those questions, to expose some of those challenges, and to listen to voices other than those ones that were sat immediately around the table with me. Was what I took away from that first dinner, where we sort of sat and had the conversation.
Bit different today, though.
Yeah, absolutely different today, and I think we very much so the granularity actually was an interesting one. I remember days where we took Happiness Lab, and I said, I can't see this, or I can't see that, or I need this data, I want to analyse it in that way, and we went too far. We said, whoa, hang on, we've got ourselves in a position where we can see too much, and we need to step back a little bit. So I think that learning was really useful. But where we got ourselves into a hole, tied ourselves in a knot, was offering to problem solve. Write it here and we'll solve the problem for you.
Yeah, quite.
And then a number of sessions that you came in and did with the team, that I was doing with the leadership team, where what we really needed to do was to get people, as I think they do now, or they do more now, to actually step up and help each other solve the problems.
Yeah.
To solve the problem yourself. To say, that's within your gift. You can do that. Just pick it up, get on with it. I think we see more of that now. It's not perfect, but it's less of an environment of, okay, here's a problem, I've written it down for you, and I expect it to be solved by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think the evolution of the product. So I think that was the big learning for us, Jim. That product you bought back 2017. As you said, there was no interaction. I still can't believe. I don't know what I was thinking. It seemed post your feedback, right? But no interaction. The like button was your suggestion. Right?
But
Can we get a like button?
We couldn't know that.
No,
until we went into the environment. So it wasn't a failing of the product.
No, of course not.
It was let's get in. It's like anything, isn't it? You have a vision in your head of what it's going to be like, and then you see it, and it's not like, okay, well, how do I need it to be different? And that was a fantastic thing for me. Was those conversations with, can we get a like button? Yeah, we can get a like button. Yeah. Can we move this? Can we change that? Can we get conversations happening rather than just?
Well, that was 2019.
So
right?
that was a really positive experience, and I think for me, the iterative growth that we've seen is fantastic. That we see the tool growing in that way, and response to our needs.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. I think I don't know if you remember me writing to you to say that we're going to introduce a right of reply. And this is what we think, and set out a set of risks. Now, this is what's going to happen if you give people the right of anonymous response. Right? It could go this way, and I think that what's fascinating that piece, just in the last couple of weeks, you've made some really substantial strides in terms of that anonymized conversation, to the point now where, of course, as you know, we talk more about, it's anonymized conversations that are supported with this sort of check-in data rather than the other way around, which is sort of where we started, if that makes sense. And that's the real beauty. I think you realize that people don't. One of the guys at Intellect put this beautifully, where he said, I think somebody was asking the question, how many levels of filter do you go through? How many levels of permission do you go through before you can share something anonymously? None. You can just share it. And we were exploring sort of what the fear was, and basically, I think it was Rajesh said, the filter's in the brain. It's why Twitter works the way it does, and LinkedIn works in a totally different way. There's nothing about the product that stops. That enforces the behavior. What happens when you give people the space and the time and the trust at work to use their voice, all the stuff that we feared might happen just doesn't.
And I'd go further now. I think as we've seen that mature, the filter's in the team.
Yeah.
So you see some of that self. Now and again we see something appear on the wall, but it's self-policing. And policing is probably the wrong word, but there'll be a conversation that happens, an interaction that will call into question, okay, do you really mean that? And actually, did you phrase that right? Did you really mean this rather than that? And you see the conversation happening in a very positive way.
Yeah.
Whereas I think in the old days, where there wasn't that right to reply. It was just a continuous stream. It was kind of ignored, and everybody sort of looked and pointed at it and said, "Oh, I'm not quite sure about that." But there was no the maturity wasn't there in the team to interact on it, and the capability wasn't there in the tool to be able to provide that response.
No, and I think that's been really interesting because you realise, and that's absolutely where we've gone, isn't it? The nuance of dialogue is fascinating because you watch, when you get, it's a bit like the survey thing, right? I'm not survey bashing you, but I think when we look at what Harken used to do this, right? What 3 words would you say about your culture? And then you think, okay, well, that's great. Now what? And there's a brilliant example we got from another organisation where they'd asked at an internal conference, as they came in the room, everybody said, what do you need from us? And they put it on a big word cloud, and the big word was support. And then they went, okay, what does that mean, right? Because everybody's got a different version of that. And I think the point about the dialogue is that you'll see that opinion, this is my problem. And then somebody comes, just clarify that for me. Tell me more about that. I'm interested in that. Or somebody else said, well, I don't have that issue. Are you, and so there's a combination of both self-soothing and exploration, and that in itself that builds that sense-making thing I was talking about earlier on, that collective understanding of what our problems really are.
And I think it's more powerful, it's certainly more powerful for me, and I hope for the team. The fact that you don't know, it might be me, it might be one of the junior managers, it might be somebody that joined the organisation last week straight from school or uni. You don't know who you're having, but it's just a really sensible conversation.
Yeah.
I'm seeing an interaction, I'm involved with the thing, and I neither know nor care. In some cases, we expose. Okay, it's Jim. I think we've got a challenge there, and how can we overcome it? But in many cases, I'm interacting on things. I'm having conversations I wouldn't expect to have the opportunity to have. Because if I walked into the middle of one of the teams and tried to get into that conversation, I think people would see Jim the leader, Jim the director, and temper their responses in a way that they don't when they don't realise it's me they're having a conversation with. So I think it's quite powerful in that respect. And sometimes I'll use that, I'll bring that out, so we run a divisional call on a fortnightly basis. 150 people on that. Sometimes I will start to bring those conversations out so people will then see, it is Jim that's having that conversation.
Quite.
But it's quite useful to be able to say, right, thanks for your input over here, because now I can give you some leadership and guidance over here in a more explicit manner.
Yeah, quite. I think that for me, again, one of the things we've learned most about inclusion. Because that's a space that's changed, right? We've really kind of, and I've learned a huge amount about this. I'd say I suspect everybody else in my team already knows this stuff. But I think the appreciation. So we talked about psychological safety earlier on, and the idea of being able to speak up. I'd never really given any consideration or thought to the idea that somebody might listen to what I had to say differently because of who said it, right? I was talking to another client about this recently, and so CEO, and we were having a chat and talking about ourselves, right? And so in our 20s, and a tendency for each of us to be the person that would walk up to the CEO at an event and say, and another thing that's wrong with this company is, you need to fix this, right? And you'd be greeted with maybe a bit of frustration, but sort of warmth and these sort of young, enthusiastic Turk kind of ideas that this guy's going to be okay, and we were discussing whether that's the same for everybody, and probably not, right? Because that bit about who says it, whether I can say it, whether I can formulate my thoughts well enough to feel confident enough. There's a whole load of stuff that says, how do we create inclusive environments, and inclusive voice in particular? That's changed hugely, hasn't it?
It has changed hugely, and I think that's the environment that I see in Harken. It allows me to say things that I might not. It allows me to test ideas, try things, have conversations, conscious that I'm not talking to a whole team. I think also one of the things that I bring out to my team is I do use that channel, that environment for conversation, for testing ideas and having dialogue with the team. And if I draw conclusions from that, don't blame me if you're not involved, kind of thing. That might sound a little unfair, but it's. I can then go on the information that's available to me, but it does provide me with the opportunity to have that dialogue in a way that I wouldn't ordinarily have, to say things that I probably couldn't say, or test things that I probably, or certainly that people wouldn't respond to, because they would view them in a different way because of where they see them coming from.
Yeah, quite. Yeah, good. Right, let's jump forward a bit. Well, there's a couple of other things I want to touch on. Lockdown, quickly. I mean, we could probably talk a long, but we had some really interesting conversations during lockdown. And I think so I talked about the empathy side of things that changed the way we thought, but there was also a big part of just acknowledging. I think, so our approach to well-being, mental health, all sort of grew up, didn't it, in that period? So talk to me about your experience, because I think that was really interesting.
I think lockdown for me, and the conversations that we had, I really struggled at times in lockdown. And when we first went into lockdown, I didn't expect to. I saw myself. I felt that I was a strong individual. That sort of mental health well-being is not something that I need to worry too much about, because I'm particularly robust. I understand myself, and it's just not going to affect me. And I think deep in lockdown, without those connections and interactions with people, it really brought it home to me that, you might have been the big tough Royal Marine a few years ago kind of thing, eldest to 6 children, all those kinds of things, that you felt you had a position in it, and as a leader in business as well, you're in a position where you need to be seen to be strong. And I think it's a very masculine thing as well. We're brought up, or certainly at nearly 50 years of age, I was brought up in a way that was, boys don't cry, get on and, suck it up and just be a man about it kind of thing. And I think lockdown really brought it home to me that we're all vulnerable, that I particularly was vulnerable, or I was as vulnerable as many other people. But actually, because I did and do still consider myself quite robust, but if I was feeling it, how were others coping? Yeah. So it made me sort of flip it around. And I think the power of the conversations we were having was, okay, if I feel like this, how do others in my team feel, and what can I possibly do about it when I'm disconnected from them and only possibly see them on a screen kind of thing?
Yeah. It was, I think that was one of the most common conversations I had in that period, with people where they were thinking about the fact that actually there is a point of sort of, I guess, privilege that comes with position and all that sort of stuff. But typically, you've got all the kit you need, you've got all the resources you need, you've got the support infrastructure that, we have all those things. And then you put it exactly the right way, but it was one I heard echoed repeatedly, which is, if it's this hard for me, I wonder, what's it like for everybody else? And I think that was, in itself, a very powerful process.
And I think the other thing it brought home for me is that everybody's situation is different. Yeah. It didn't matter and okay, that first lockdown, the weather was really good, and in some cases it was kind of it was a bit of a novelty. We hadn't done it for very long, and you go and sit in the garden and do some work, but not everybody's got a garden. Some people were living on their own, and that might be great. You got plenty of space and you can do your own thing. But actually, when you do that for a few weeks, how much of a struggle does it become that you've got nobody else to talk to? At the other end of the extreme, people with families, they've got people to interact with, but it's the same people every single day. So we all had our own challenges. And I think somebody summed it up for me that relatively early on, but the quote that I saw, and I can't remember who said it, but the quote that I saw was, we're not all in the same boat, but we're all in the same storm. Yeah. And that was something that I was really conscious of. I knew my own situation, and I could relate to others in a similar situation. I could kind of relate to other situations that I thought about, but how many other different scenarios were there? How many other different things were there that people were struggling with that I'd never thought of and I wasn't taking account of? And that, when I'm sat on that Teams call with the whole, because that's where it started, our whole divisional call, saying, right, let's all get together on a weekly basis, get the whole team together. Who am I not taking account of? Who am I not conscious of, and demonstrating that I'm conscious of when I'm talking to people in that room? Who am I missing out? And who's the person that sort of sat virtually at the back of the room thinking, that's all very well and that's great for them and for them and for them, but what about me? I think that started to eat into me a little bit in terms of, what am I missing and who am I missing?
Yeah, well done for doing that. I think it's, there were a load of things in there, even, because I had a view of your organisation through data through that period, and because we had the stuff before. I think what was interesting, you remind me of that summer, was interesting, when because there was a big drop. So I don't think we talked about this, right? But of course we introduced GDR as a way, if you remember, so we came away from the average happiness stuff and started to look at GDR as a way of saying, how do we normalize data and start to talk about it in a more meaningful way for managers in particular, right? And then I look back at that, applied that way of using the data back to the set that we had in 2020. And what was quite interesting was that GDR fell quite sharply at the beginning of lockdown and then rose to really quite a significantly good number through that summer when it was sunny and people were kind of got used to the isolation bit. Then it fell away dramatically as we got into, as the sort of winter started to go, autumn came, right? And then there were the sort of some specific things for your organisation that you went through at the end of that year, where there were some communication challenges, as I remember, and some fairly big messages, and that saw an impact. But it was really interesting. You watched that sort of peak, and it was in 2020 transition through the first half of 21 that you really saw the impact, if that makes sense. And so in data terms, I thought that was really interesting. The thing that the second part of that story, from our perspective, as we looked at the organisation, was I remember when we were building the algorithms that we now, again, I can't. It's amazing to me to think that they came in 2021. So we didn't have them. So this sort of the automatically spotting people who might be struggling. And I remember we did an interim step, which is to say, well, can we use the data sets that we're going to use for this stuff and just expose for me little packages of data that I can see anonymized patterns of data for individual humans. And I remember realizing at that point that we had been up until then relying upon, from a well-being perspective, people sharing. So we knew. So at that point, you got people sharing, I'm having a difficult time, and then you'd get support and encouragement and all that sort of stuff from colleagues. But when we turned on this data set, you think, wow, there were like 40 people across the business who were clearly having a really difficult time and weren't saying anything. So they were checking in with, and obviously really finding life tough, but not doing anything so that anybody else could see. And that was a really telling moment as well, because for me, I sort of think, crikey, how would you know, right? If they don't tell you, they won't show you, you can't see them, that was incredible, and it's stuff like that sort of builds into where we are today that changes stuff. But it was all tied up in that same issue.
And it does change things, but it almost in a way creates more of a challenge. So the kind of the API type data that I've asked for now that I'll sort of feed into my dashboards causes me to ask more questions in many ways. I think it's a positive that I'm asking the questions, and I'll always conclude. So as you say, we expose that data, and we've got these people that aren't calling out, but look like they need us to reach out.
Yeah.
I think all we can do is to try and reach out, try and make that connection, try and sort of hold a hand out and say, look, do you need some assistance? We can't cross a line. And the anonymity line is absolutely solid. Yeah. And we can't cross that line because the whole thing breaks down around itself. So for me, it's about asking the question. It's about giving the opportunity. It's about being there and saying, look, there's somebody here for you, and actually trying to do that in different ways. Not always not feeling like an automated response. This is spiked up in the data, and therefore you've now got. And I know it doesn't do that, but we need to make it feel more human, and it is more human, and that's really the focus for me when I see that kind of data and I see those sorts of things in the data, is making sure, okay, have we tried this? Have we tried that? Are we engaging with that individual? What response have we had? And what else have we tried?
Yeah, but I think you're on to exactly the right path. Because the way we see it, and our views on it, by the way, have changed relatively significantly over time. I think when we started with algorithms and stuff like that, we were always very cautious of how much should we be encouraging your teams to reach out to one another, and how much should you act on. The thing I think we've realised, and it comes back to that connection, it comes back to that trust point. Trust comes from care. The guy called Paul Zacher wrote a very interesting book called The Trust Factor. And his analysis says that 84% of trust is derived from feeling cared for. And so when people aren't prepared to speak up, there's maybe lots of reasons for that. But what we can do is, just as you suggested, is by reaching out and being there and offering to support and to be genuinely listening, all that sort of stuff tells people that you care about them as people first. And and that's where the trust comes from, and that's where we get influence and are able to then start to move teams in the way that we want them to in the context of our work.
And I think that's where we saw that positive spike in lockdown, because we told our people that we care about them. Our people came first, and we were very protective of our people. And there were some challenges post lockdown.
Yeah.
But for me, we built that trust.
Yeah, you did.
And it took a while. I think I remember conversations with people. Really, can I step back, take a few hours out in the middle of the day just to sort of refresh my mind, or go and teach the kids, or do what it is? Yes, absolutely you can, because this is looking like it might be a long haul. So let's look after each other. Let's look after the individuals, and as you say, the team will kind of look after itself. The outcome will be achieved as a result of that. So I think we did a really good job of building that. I'm not sure it's been as easy to maintain post-COVID. When we come out the other end, now they're all, it was almost a simple problem during COVID. We're in lockdown. We're all locked in one space. There isn't much we can do. There's not much choice about things. So let's just control what we can control. Now we're sort of back out in the new real world. There are multiple choices and factors and things going on that we're all struggling to take account of, and they mean different things to different people. So I think that's the today's challenge.
Yeah, and that was going to a nice segue, because I think it's the tail of it has not gone, has it? We're not finished with it yet. But the so challenges. So as we look for the period ahead, if we haven't already talked about them, because we covered quite a fair amount of ground, are there 2 or 3 things that you think are the sort of big challenges in the human context of sort of work looking forward?
Yes, I think that I've already talked about the common purpose. I think the common purpose is, but that's not necessarily a COVID related thing. It's it's a corporate piece. It's much easier in a sports team or a military environment to identify and work towards a common purpose. We're in a much more sort of nebulous, a much broader environment in the corporate world. So purpose for me is a really big challenge. I think balance, I've also talked about, is that what does hybrid working mean, and what does it mean to different people in different organisations?
Yep.
We're all trying to establish that, and we're all looking for an answer, if you like. And I'm not sure there is one. I'm not sure there's a correct answer that okay, I've got it. This is what it is. I've written it down, and here it is. I'm not sure that balance. It's individual. And it's based on your priorities and your objectives and all those kinds of things. But that's a particular challenge for us now, because we've come out of that lockdown environment. We've been, during lockdown, we were in that close your laptop at 5 o'clock and walk away from it.
Yeah.
And we're still hanging on to that, but trying to sort of move away and socialise a bit more and that kind of thing. So that purpose piece, I think, for me, those are the 2 biggest things that I think I need to focus on as a business leader. And there are many others, but those are really the key ones, I think. Okay,
and I think so. There's one last thing that I want to talk about, if I may, and that's just what. So if you had, this is a daft question, and the last time I asked this, by the way, the guy responded by saying, "I actually have a magic wand." But if you had a magic wand, what would be the one thing you would change about the world of work to solve a problem in a heartbeat?
I haven't got a magic wand, but my kids have got a few. I'm not sure what they're using for. I think it's that connection piece. That, when I think back to the most high performing teams and the most fun I've ever had, it was that 20 years ago in a military environment with a very close knit team. So we can't recreate that, but to try and create some of those connections, I think has a real power and a real value for any team to have that that want to come to work because you enjoy the environment and you enjoy being with the people that you're spending time with. I think is a really powerful factor in the success of business. And if we can get teams working, enjoying spending time together, they will work together much more effectively, and we'll all kind of benefit from it. So I think it's creating connections. I would wave the wand to create connections across the teams.
By the way, what do your teams say? Because I'm sort of listening to you say that, and what's going through my mind is I'm thinking about when I was younger. So London, and everybody was out in the evenings after work, right? So there was a vibrant social scene, and that was brilliant for young people, right? And then I sort of think, okay, and then you get a bit older, and nobody goes to the pub after work, and people have got to get home to kids and all that. So it's very different, isn't it, for everybody? And I'm just thinking, so what do your teams say about it in terms of that sort of idea of socialising? What's their... I think it's not socialising. It's to be clear, it's about the blend that you're describing, right?
Yeah, and I think that blend, I think we had that blend before. When you look at SJP and us specifically, sort of foundation events and those kinds of things, and they're starting to come back. But the sorts of things that I would have been involved in, running groups and cycling groups, but there'd be all different manner of groups and people spending time with each other outside of work, really strong relationships, and that feels like that's more difficult to generate now. It's more difficult to say, to get people to come together as a group. So actually, we've got an event this week, a climbing event, tomorrow afternoon, and we've got good take up. But the guys have worked really hard to sort of generate some interest around that, and to pull some people together on that. Whereas it almost used to happen automatically. We were a very close knit group. SJP was a fantastic place with a really close culture, and people would, out of habit, spend time together. And we're out of that habit. The habit has disappeared because of the linkages were broken during COVID. And I think there's been some churn. People move around, people move on, people join. So the organisation changed in that period, and we're trying to rebuild what we had before. And it's challenging to sort of reinvigorate that, I think.
Yeah. Okay, terrific, great. Well, listen. I think we covered a huge amount of ground. We covered a lot of subjects. Thank you so much for your support. I've got to say that because, of course, as I said, you're the guy that was the first person to use Harken. You're still with us today, which is incredible. And thank you for taking so much time to talk with us today.
You're very welcome. It's really good to talk to you, and as I've said all along, fantastic platform that gives me a fantastic insight to the team and a means of engaging. So
thank you very much.
Cheers.